Hi guys, my name's Seb Tudor, I'm the man on the Silver Mountain, and welcome back. Today, following on again from my other two videos that I've already done, I want to talk about the feminine side of things, femininity as a thing. And I feel like this is actually the more interesting one of the two, because masculinity hasn't changed much. There's been no need to change it. You know, it's a set of traits, a set of behaviours that has always been useful. And yes, whilst in the modern world there is less of a place for some of those behaviours and it's causing problems for people, femininity has changed, especially a lot over the last, say, 100 years. And maybe not in terms of the core traits, but in terms of how those traits are kind of expressed, and also in regards to how many other traits from especially from the more masculine end of things have been adopted in one way or another within certain areas. You know, it's a very interesting thing, feminism, or not feminism, sorry, femininity, because it's been taken on into several different areas that it hadn't been before, and as a result, it's within those areas developed new ways of applying the traits that they have to emulate behaviours that are either from men or just better suited to the area that they now find themselves in. And you know, that's a fascinating thing, considering for most of history and for most of our existence as a species, they have had very socially focused roles. They have had roles that are very much to do with children, and then not an awful lot else. But you know, there are some standout examples where that's not the case as well. But anyway, oh, excuse me. Moving on though, let's take a look at the traits again first, and the definition. And so the definition again, like with masculinity, is very much the set of traits, behaviours, and so on and so forth, attributes that would ordinarily be associated with a female individual. And those tend to include things like gentleness, empathy, sensitivity, nurturing behaviours, and so on and so forth. And as a result, you know, fair dues. Those things can be seen in an awful lot more in women than men, especially things like empathy. You know, you will not have, for example, as many men crying in movie theatres at a sad movie as you would women, due to the amount of empathy, the levels of empathy that those two individuals, male and female, may have. But again, you know, they're not entirely exclusive traits. They aren't entirely exclusive things, but they are most prevalent in women. You know, myself being a man with quite a high scores on empathy and emotional intelligence, which is why I make a fairly reasonable coach, I'd like to think. But those areas there that allow me that insight, you know, sometimes when I'm talking to other men and I realise that they don't have by any means as much empathy or as much understanding in those areas, or they aren't as introspective as myself, so that they don't analyse the things that they're feeling or working through when they don't understand them. You know, even you know, it's very apparent to me the difference between the levels of empathy in women compared to those in men, because there's no, you know, I'll agree that there is absolutely no point in having an abundance of empathy in that caveman scenario where you could potentially see your best mate thrown through the air by a woolly rhino, having his ribs crushed and whatever else. You know, you'll feel bad afterwards and you'll deal with it afterwards. Having instant empathy, having that sensitivity to it, you know, you don't want to break down in the middle of trying to secure food, because if you don't secure the food, then it's more than just your friend that would end up in a bad state. But let's take the feminine angle to the caveman scenario. caveman scenario. And in those situations, women were far more, or the female of the species, far more focused on raising children, on caring for whatever home they had, whatever tribal settlement there was. Ensuring the food in regards to the gathering side of things was far more available, so that when the men would come back with a large haul from a big hunt, that potentially there would also still be other food there available to keep people sustained whilst they waited for that return. And as a result, things like, in that setting, things like empathy, things like sensitivity, things like compassion, tolerance, and so on and so forth, caring for one another, that's going to be far more important, simply because you're going to be in close proximity to a lot of others who are having to care for small individuals who have no way of defending themselves. There has to be a lot of bonding, there has to be a lot of building of relationships in that, because you do not have the same direct bonding experience as, say, men hunting something. Men hunting something have to bond because they are a team, and they have to work as a team and function as such. In regards to women, you don't have as many of those experiences. You have a lot more in the caveman setting. You have a lot more relaxed experiences where you are having to gather things, you are having to nurture and raise children, you are having to possibly look after the sick and infirm to one extent or another. But as a result, the reason why women converse so much and bond through those kind of social experiences, it's because they historically, and in the way that they have evolved, it's not been they haven't had anything else to bond over, and it's a way of strengthening their group to make sure it survives. But then when people say, "Oh, well, there are very butch men, butch women rather. There are very masculine women, women that are much more tomboyish and whatever, however else you want to refer to it, be it supposedly offensive or not. All of those other areas where they go, oh, well, they're much more masculine." And again, in regards to what I said about men the other day and masculinity the other day, just because there is some variation, the traits are still the same. In a male hunting group, which is, I feel, the easier example to explain, you are still going to have that order. You're going to have that hierarchy, because one person is going to have to call the shots, and then the rest are going to fan out and work as a team around that goal that the leader has laid out. Within a tribe, within the female half of the tribe that is sat back in the settlement, you're still going to have something like that. You're going to have those that are more capable of the physical labour required, that may very well not be fighting a mammoth, but may still be moving heavy things, dealing with things that would threaten the settlement, attacks from animals or other such things. You're still going to have to deal with those things to one extent or another. So you're still going to have that variation in regards to those that are more masculine, those that display more masculine traits, purely for the sake of dealing with those situations. But just because there is a scale of femininity and a scale of masculinity, as I said in my gender video, it does not necessarily mean that the two match or meet at any point in the middle. It just means we're the same damn species and we're all built of the same stuff. There are only so many ways that you can succeed at a task with a set amount of things. So our base materials are the same, but the way they are constructed is slightly different, and then that still informs greater differences further on, especially when they fit together in the best possible configuration. And as a result, though, you're moving on and you're going, okay, so those people are sensitive and they're caring and all the rest of it, and they're looking after each other. They're bonding over conversation and over let's go back to things like mutual cleaning and preening and stuff like that, which is potentially where a lot of things like women's focused towards the aesthetic, or in regards to their more women being interested in things like fashion than men. All of those things come from this settlement dwelling kind of hunter-gatherer age, and there's no two ways that we can just avoid that. It's just where we come from. And as a result, though, I said femininity had changed more, and it has. You had women taking more control at various points in history, most prominently after suffrage and into the last 100 years. Yeah, you had them taking much larger roles. You had them taking much more in the way of control of things like areas of the economy or areas of study. And then after after equality was written into law in the 1970s in at least in the Western world, for a short period of time after that happened, you had an influx of women into male areas whereby they would use things like their communication skills, their tolerance, their empathy in different ways. And as a result, for example, empathy being used to gain greater understanding and therefore gain greater acceptance from those around you, allowed many women to integrate more successfully into otherwise male-dominated environments. The supposed tolerance and kind of gentleness and so on would have been much more helpful to them in regards to surviving in those places once they had gained entry and acceptance, because there would probably still be some kind of backlash towards them. They would still find it harder to keep up with their male counterparts in certain ways, depending on the area they were working in. And yes, as a result, though, that tolerance, that acceptance of just seeing the things the way they are, glossing over them, moving forward with them, whatever else, that allowed a greater amount of survival. However, then you did see things like certain areas of masculinity becoming more prominent in those areas. But the thing is, then there was still the drop-off. We're 40 years on now from that time, and the drop-off still happened. You had a large influx of women into male-dominated areas, male-dominated professions and things like that, and yet then there was a drop-off. And the reason why there was a drop-off was simply because those places that they had forced themselves into didn't add up as much with the general female populace and their sensibilities and their inclinations. And as a result, now there is, for example, a disparity in regards to men and women in leadership. There is a disparity in regards to men and women in STEM fields. Yeah, but that's fine, surely, because the femininity in this can still be demonstrated. There are still women in those fields. There are still women that work in a very different way to men, but are still achieving things within those fields, and they're still doing very well. They stand as an example of just getting on with the job and being effective. Good job to them. I recently saw a female CEO in, I think it was either Time or Fortune magazine, and she quite literally got asked about gender in business as the only female CEO or the only female director on this board, and she went, "Gender doesn't have a place here. We just get the job done." And that's the thing. Most places, it's just a case of getting the job done. It doesn't matter who you are or where you're from. If you come in and you get the job done, you're doing fine, and people will accept that you are doing fine. As a result, though, in her particular instance, she is using things like her communication skills, tolerance, and she's continuing to use her drive, that is much more of a personal thing, to get places. Does she need to be excessively assertive? No, not if she's got the belief and the faith of the people around her, because they understand her, because she's communicated in such a way to allow them to get behind her. Femininity is, in regards to the negative arguments that come out around masculinity and femininity is not a weakness. And this is one of the issues that I have with current the current wave of feminism that is so very loud but achieves so little. Um, especially when I hear in debates that men aren't allowed to speak, or in discussions or round tables or whatever, when that men aren't allowed to speak until women have finished, or women must always speak first, and stuff like that. And it's like, being female isn't a weakness. It's a different set of strengths. Men may seem physically imposing, driven, aggressive, and so on and so forth, but that isn't necessarily always strong. Strength comes in so many different forms and in different ways. I've outlined what I feel and what I've discussed with my clients seems to be a strong person, and you'll realise that resilience, reason, and responsibility, in the ways that I defined them and the ways that we discussed them in my previous video, those things are available to both genders, to both masculine and feminine individuals. And so there is no excuse to be claiming that one is weaker than the other, or that you need special treatment. It's a nonsense. And it's all informed, all of these differences are informed by biology, and they have been successful. Those differences, the different ways of working and the way that they slot together to achieve greater things, they have been working for 20,000 years or so, since the dawn of any kind of human civilization. 15 to 20,000 years ago, when we were all living in caves or whatever else, when the first people were making huts out of mud and like twigs, these strengths on both sides have been required in different places, and when they work together and when they work well together, they have achieved like the monumental societies that we live in to date. All of the advances that we have at our fingertips, the ability for me to speak to you directly right now, it comes from everyone working together in some way or another. It doesn't come from people arguing if one group of people is stronger or weaker than the other. So, especially on something as just core and simple as gender, sex, or whatever else. If you have this set of traits, they are a different set of strengths. They are going to be a set of strengths that, in a broad way of speaking, are specific to your gender or your sex. But all of these things are going to be specific to you. As said, I as a man have a high score on emotional intelligence and empathy and things like that. As a result, is that because I have a higher score in a feminine trait than other men? Does that mean that I'm in some way defective or deficient? No, it means I've stolen a strength from the other side. It means I've stolen a strength somehow through my chemistry, to one extent or another. I have adopted or taken or assimilated a strength from the other gender, and that just makes me far more dominant and far more terrifying when it comes to me actually being assertive or independent or focused on my goals. And as a result, that's what you should be doing. Look at your strengths. Don't even bother with the weaknesses, because I bet you anything that they barely exist compared to how strong you are. But anyway, that's my last few comments on this, because whilst this is more interesting, it's also currently one of the things that is currently viewed more positively in the world, and as a result, there's a little less to say about it. The whole femininity and feminist issue is often lifted up. Women have received an awful lot of assistance in regards to various things, and at times still gain a fair amount of additional incentives and things like affirmative action and stuff like that in regards to getting into universities and things, which is why you know, at least in a fair number of places in the Western world, there are now far more female university students and graduates and so on and so forth than there are male. But anyway, tell me what you guys think. You know, I'm suggesting here that we've all got strengths and we all just need to work together with those strengths to achieve great things. We need to stop all this arguing. Do you agree with me? You know, do you have any other thoughts, or am I just talking out my arse and you don't like me? Whatever, leave me a comment down the comments below just to let me know what you think and how you feel. But otherwise, if you did like this and you'd like to hear me do maybe some more on this, going into some other bits and pieces or whatever, then please leave me a like. Otherwise, subscribe for more, and I will see you in the next video. Take care.